everyone, it's Jen from Midnight Sky Fibers, and with the holidays just around the corner, I know that a number of you are going to be asking for interchangeable knitting needles for Christmas or for a holiday present. One of the big questions I used to get when I worked in a yarn store is, how do I choose what sort of interchangeable knitting needles do I want to get? Because there's a huge range of prices and there's several different types out there. Just before we begin, I'm not going to talk about interchangeable crochet hooks. There are interchangeable crochet hooks out there, which can be nice for going down to the really small sizes, but I tend to prefer just the kits that have a bunch of different sizes of crochet hooks out there, because for me crochet hooks just untwist and fall off, and that's really bad. But back to the knitting needle kits. There's two basic realms of interchangeable knitting needles. There's the Denise and Boye knitting needles, which are expensive, but significantly less expensive than the Addi and Addi lace interchangeable knitting needles. So the Denise knitting needles, interchangeable knitting needles, are the ones that I currently have. I have had both the Denise and Boye knitting needles, and worked with the Addi ones as well. The Denise are the ones that I keep in my collection because I like their joins a lot better than the Boye interchangeables. For me, the Denise ones, they click in, which is much better for me for untwisting, since needles that tend to screw on tend to just unscrew for me and fall off, and it creates an entire disaster of bliss. I know a lot of other people don't have this problem, but I really prefer the Denise interchangeables to the Boye interchangeables. The downside of the Denise ones is that their cables tend to be pretty thick. They aren't really as bendable. I really like the Addi cables on regular Addi knitting needles, because they are very flexible. They don't kink up, they don't twist, but they're not so thick that they don't work really well. The Denise ones are much more like the older style circular knitting needles. So I think that they're a little bit harder to work with, especially if you like doing magic loop or you're trying to knit at a very small diameter. That being said, I keep a pair of Denise interchangeables around because I don't like to have a lot of different lengths of knitting needles for really large size knitting needles. I mostly use size 5 and under. I mostly really actually just use size 1 and 2 knitting needles, even in circulars. So when I need those larger sizes, I don't want to have 10 pairs of size 11 through 15 knitting needles, because I'm only going to really use them maybe once or twice a year. Otherwise I'm just going to be using double pointed needles for something like a hat and bulky yarn. So I really like the Denise knitting needles for if I decide I want to make a bulky knit blanket, knit a sweater on their own that's really thick. I think it's great. They do occasionally come unclicked, which is annoying, and like most other knitting needles, the problem I have with most really large circular knitting needles is I don't like how they go from the knitting needle down to the cord, and there's a big dip in how the knitting in the knitting needle, so because you're then constantly having to try and slide your stitches over that dip and it gets caught. And I do have a little bit of a problem with that with the Denise needles, as well as having things catch on the joins between the cords, which can be used to make them longer. Not to make it all sound bad, I love the Denise because it's really easy. You know, most of the yarn stores carry Denise, and you can get extension kits. I love it I use it for magic loop. I can't use it for magic loop knitting, and I like it for Mobius knitting, like hat boardy, for a lot of her scarves that are knit with just hundreds of stitches around. It's great for that. For the Boye knitting interchangeable knitting needle kits, I like them for the affordability, though the Denise and Boye are really very similar in price now, but you can often find the Boye knitting needles on Amazon or even on eBay, since they've been around for a really long time, so you can often find them used for fairly inexpensively. Both it and the Denise had the problem of not really going down to the really small sizes because of the size of the cords. The problem that I have with the Boye is I think that they tend to untwist. Depending on how you hold your knitting needles, you might not have that problem, or you might just be able to twist them on really tightly so that they don't fall off. I actually only ever got rid of my Boye knitting interchangeable set because someone I knew happened to really want a pair of interchangeable knitting needles, so I gave them to them. They work fine. If I had to choose between the two, I'd choose the Denise ones. But if you prefer metal knitting needles to plastic knitting needles, you definitely want to go with the Boye, which are metal. Since the Denise ones are plastic and they're a little bit more sticky, the Boye ones, the stitches tend to slide over a little bit better. The Addi and the Addi Lace Click interchangeable knitting needles are by far my favorite. I do not own a pair, though I did get to play around with them when we got them into the knitting store that I used to work at. I really regret not getting a pair, though at the time I was working in the yarn store, the Addi Lace Interchangeables were not out and we did not have them in stock, so I didn't get them. I really prefer the Addi Lace tips to the regular Addi knitting needles, since I really like pointy knitting needles. The pointier the better. Since I tend to do a lot of lace, and so a lot of what I use knitting needles, circular knitting needles for, tends to be lace. Otherwise I'm doing double pointed needles for color work or socks. So I'd have a pair if it weren't for the fact that the lace ones weren't out yet when I worked in the yarn store, and since then I just haven't been able to justify getting them since I've had the Denise knitting needle ones. However, I like them a lot better. Their join is much better. Their cords are much better. I like the tips a lot better. I like that they're metal instead of plastic. Plastic needles are fine, though if you knit really tight, I think that they tend to stick more. So unless you're knitting with a really silky or really smooth fabric, the stitches don't glide over as smoothly, which depending on your project, that might be good. You don't want your lace stitches flying off. But I really prefer the Addi. If you can spare the over $100, I think they're usually like $170, maybe a little bit more. I think they were about $170 on Amazon. Go for them. Otherwise, get the Denise or Boye ones on sale. I think the Addi ones also come in a better range of sizes that I like a little bit more, which I don't think for me isn't too big of a deal. For interchangeable knitting needles, I want a range of sizes, but I don't expect any interchangeable knitting needle set to have all the sizes, just because of the size of the cords, and realistically, how often are you going to use a size 17 or a size 50 interchangeable knitting needle? So I think the range of sizes is for all of them are really pretty good. It really just comes down to price, and if you can afford the additional cost of the Addi ones. All the interchangeable knitting needles are found online. The Denise ones can often be found in knitting stores and fabric stores, as can the Boye ones, which are often found more in craft or fabric stores than the Addi ones are. You can usually only find those in higher end or your local yarn stores, as well as online. Thanks for listening. I hope this helps you choose which interchangeable knitting needles to ask for the holidays.